Okay, so we have our nibs. I've actually got the nibs in the oven. I'm heating them because I want the cocoa butter, when we start to add them to our chocolate melanger, I want the cocoa butter inside the nibs to be liquid. So I've already weighed them and now I'm heating them. And I've got my oven set at on warm, around 160 degrees. That's okay because I'm working quickly. If I wanted to let them sit for a long time, I'd probably set it at 140. So I also weighed the nibs, and what I came up with is that we got 378 grams of nibs. So if we look at our yield, remember we had 500 grams of beans. So 378 divided by 500 equals 75.6% yield. So we did a little bit better than 75%. To be honest with you, I often get less than 75%, sometimes as low as 70%, but 75.6 is great, okay? Now, what we know now, so we're gonna make a dark chocolate. We're gonna make a 70% dark chocolate. I like 70% because it really brings out the cocoa. It's not too bitter. There's still 30% sugar. And so you can taste the cocoa, but it's sweet enough to be a good eating chocolate. The reason we call it 70% is it's 70% cacao. My formula for this 70% is 65% nibs, 29.7% sugar, 5% cocoa butter, 0.3% lecithin, and just a trace of vanilla, 0.04%. We'll provide these formulas for you. But we have a little bit of a percentage or a proportion problem to figure out because we have 375 grams of nibs. Well, how much chocolate is that? All right. And so we get that very easily. If our chocolate's going to contain 65% nibs or liquor, then we just take 378 and we divide that by 0.65 and we have 581 grams of chocolate. So that's what we're going to make. We're going to make a half a kilo of chocolate. Okay, so how do we figure out what the ingredients are? Well, we write that number down. Let's erase this. And we write, let's call it 580 to be. So we have 580 grams total for our batch. All right, and so if you remember, we were 65% nibs, which we have weighed already. But how much sugar? So we take 580 times 27.7, 0.277 times 500 or times 580 gives us 160.7 grams of sugar. How much cocoa butter? 580 times 0.05, roughly 29 grams of cocoa butter. And we have 378 grams of nibs, all right, which, again, I've pre-weighed the cocoa butter because I've got to get it melted. So I have the cocoa butter in the oven, and that's melting as well. Pardon me. We won't add the cocoa butter until we're almost in the middle of the chocolate making process. So, so we have our formula, all right? And the amount of lecithin, I mean, we can do that. Lecithin is 0.003 times 580. So we're going to add 1.74 grams of lecithin. You'll see I'm going to eyeball that. And the vanilla, we don't worry about. We're going to add that with an eyedropper, okay? So we can get started. I'm going to just move this over so you can see. This is my chocolate maker. It's made by Champion. Let's see if I get this a little better here. Sorry. There we go. All right, it's a Champion. It's a spice. It's a melanger. So what there are two. The bottom of the melanger rotates, and that rotation causes the melanger stones to move, and the shear between the bottom plate, the rotating plate at the bottom, and the backward spinning rolls is what creates the shear, which does our grinding. And I'll just turn this over so you can see it. And you can see there's these two wheels, all right? They're actually grinding stones. And then the base is what turns. So if I turn it on, you can kind of see that. You can see how it turns. All right? You don't want to run it dry, all right? Because you'll wear down the stones, all right? So I've got to keep this hot, all right? And so the way I keep it hot, I have a hair dryer. Again, I can move this over a little bit, and you can see. And I put the hair dryer, I typically put it on medium. Now that uses a lot of electricity, but you need to keep this warm. If you don't keep it warm, it'll freeze up, all right? And that's a mess. All right, so we're gonna start. So I'm gonna turn, this is gonna make a little bit of noise because I'm gonna turn the hair dryer on. All right, and it is a little noisy. It also uses a lot of electricity. You need to be conscious of that. And that's just gonna heat the bowl, all right? And now I'm gonna turn it on and it's spinning. Now it has a lid that keeps the chocolate from spattering out. And as I said, this is a Premier. It costs about $300. So if we look at $300 for the Winnow, $300 for the Premier, the conch, you know, about 270 for the juicer, and another, you know, 100, 150 for the oven. And you're right in the $1,000 range. So, you know, it's a reasonably small investment to be in chocolate making. So I'm going to turn this on. And I'm going to start to add the nibs. Now, you've got to start adding the nibs slowly. You've got to begin by adding the nibs slowly. If you add the nibs too fast, you'll foul the rollers. It'll stop, and then you have to take it all apart and clean it. So you don't want to do that. So we're going to add these nibs very slowly. All right. Hear the sound change as it starts to grind the nibs. Now the nibs have like the structure of the plant. You know, the seed structure is still there. And so when we grind, we're going to break that structure down and we're going to release the cocoa butter. The cocoa butter in the nibs is contained in fat cells. And those fat cells hold it tight. And that's why the nibs are dry, right? But as we grind it, and we reduce the particle size, we break down those fat cells, and we release the cocoa butter. Now, this is kind of a slow process. You've got to begin very slowly, so you don't foul it. And I like to keep the nibs in the oven while I'm grinding. Now, we're going to be kind of doing this fairly slowly, so I'm going to do two things at once. So while those are grinding, I'm going to just get over here. I'm going to get my bowl, and I'm going to weigh the sugar. And I use organic sugar. I buy it, you know, from Kirkland, which is Costco in the United States. It's not totally purified, so there's still a little brown color to it. And I think it has a very good flavor. And so I prefer that to granulated sugar, refined sugar. You can use a lot of different types of sugar. You can use coconut sugar. You can use brown sugar, all right? But you have to be careful using brown sugar because that still contains a little bit of moisture. And moisture is the enemy of chocolate. And so when adding like unrefined sugar, brown sugar, Moscato sugar, you need to be very careful because if there's too much moisture in the sugar, it'll make a really thick chocolate. We'll talk about that later. So I'm going to, again, I've got my scale here. It's tiered, and I'm going to weigh out 160 grams of sugar. Actually 160.7, so I'm right on the money there. So it's not a lot of sugar, but sugar is much heavier than nibs. And sugar is easy to grind. What's tough to grind are the nibs. That's most of the work that you'll do in chocolate making is grinding the cocoa component. Sugar grinds really easy, really fast. And that's why we're going to grind the nibs first. We're going to get them ground into a liquor. It's, with all that cocoa butter released, and then we'll add the sugar. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind is that as you're adding the nibs, you want to make sure they go into the chamber and don't get on the wheel or on the structure, because then they won't grind. Now, I'm going to just move this over my stand here, and hopefully you can see what's going on in there. All right, so we're gonna be a little closer now so you can see what's happening there. My hair dryer is providing heat. The nibs are starting to get broken up. I can add a few more. And again, I'm very careful not to get the nibs on the paddles or on the wheel, because then they won't grind. You also got to be careful that you keep the lid on because they'll fly all over the place. So unfortunately, we're going to watch this thing turn around for a while until we get the nibs. And there's no real escaping that. We just got to do it. And I can't go fast because I'll stop the roller. Once it liquefies, and you can see it turning there, once it liquefies, it's much easier, all right? But once you get a little bit of that cocoa butter released and it starts to get, liquid, the nibs will grind. You can add the nibs much faster. You can see our nibs. You can see there's a few pieces of shell in there. They're big pieces, but they really don't weigh anything. And so in terms of the total composition, we're still good. I like to pick them out. I can keep doing it while I'm working, but it's really not necessary. If you look at what's in commercial chocolate, you'd be surprised. There's much more shell than this. All right, so we're just going. You can kind of see it. You can see the consistency changing. It's releasing a tremendously beautiful aroma of chocolate. I'm going to let that really run for a little bit. Put my nibs back in. You can see the cocoa butter. 29 grams of cocoa butter, which I've melted. I use you can ask, why cocoa butter? Why do I add cocoa butter? Because there's plenty of fat in the nibs to make a good chocolate if I just use 70% of nibs and forgot about the cocoa butter. But I find that a little bit of cocoa butter actually makes the chocolate easier to work with, and also it tones down a little bit, it backs off, because the cocoa butter doesn't have much flavor. It has some, but not much. It tends to dilute out a little bit the liquor, make the chocolate at 70% cacao a little milder. You don't have to add cocoa butter. You can add 70% of nibs, and that chocolate will be fine. In fact, there are chocolate makers in the United States who advertise they only use 2 ingredients. They use cocoa beans and sugar. That's all they use to make a 70%. I find that to be a little harsh by my taste, but to each his own. Let's see how we're doing here. I don't know if you can see it. I'll turn it off, but we are starting to liquefy. You can just look in a little bit, and you can see that that is starting to liquefy. And maybe I'll get some light on it. You can see it a little better. Okay, so let's keep going here. All right, and again, the hair dryer is necessary. Again, it does pull a lot of watts, so it uses a lot of electricity. When I'm making a lot of chocolate, my electric bill goes up, but it's absolutely necessary. Now, if you can figure out another way of warming it, then go to it. But this is the best that I've seen. And when we go to milk chocolate, I like it because I can put a lot of heat on, and that helps to caramelize the milk, and that's what's really necessary in a milk chocolate. So let's keep adding nibs. I think we can speed things up. What can happen too is I'll start to get some buildup on the rollers, and so I can take the hair dryer and put it right in there, and then apply heat directly to the rollers, and that will melt that chocolate on the rollers. But this is going very well. And again, one of the secrets is to preheat the nibs, because that gets the cocoa butter liquefied, and this early stage is much easier. Now, whoops. Another thing I can do is I can start to add just a little bit of cocoa butter, all right? And what that will do too is that will add liquid, and that will help this stuff kind of let us add the nibs faster. That's another advantage of cocoa butter. Notice the sound has changed. It's a lot less noisy. 2 hands to do that is better. And you can see it's really becoming liquid. And now I can speed up my nibs. Adding the nibs, I can speed things up a little bit. Not too fast. Again, if you've ever had the thing seize up on you, you don't want to do it again, because you have to stop, you have to take it apart. All right, so you want to move slowly, cautiously, like an artisan. Again, I want to have this heat applied, and that helps to keep the chocolate from building up. Got a little chocolate on my scoop here. Oops. The hair dryer will tend to move as, you know, but you want to keep it right in the middle, all right? And what's happening, how this works, is again, the rotor is this whole section of the conch, the top section of the conch. And at the bottom of it, there's a stone surface, all right? And that's what we call, well, it's the rotor. That's what's turning, all right? And that creates friction against the rollers, against the grinding stones, and they move in the opposite direction. And the chocolate goes in between, and the action of the two surfaces spinning against each other create a shear. And that's what grinds the nib, all right? It grinds the sugar. That's what causes the grinding. And this type of arrangement, it's called a melanger. And some people call it a spice grinder. But if you go back into the 1870s, and even early into like the 1900s, the early 1900s, this was the only way that they ground chocolate. And they used very large melangers. So imagine this, but able to hold 600 pounds, 600 kilos of nibs and sugar. And that's what they used to make the chocolate. Now this is both a refiner and a conch. Conching is just an intensive mixing with heat, which tends to drive off the volatiles in the cocoa. And really, you don't need too much conching with fine chocolate, because the fine flavored beans, they have these like very subtle aromatic characteristics, which, you know, if you apply too much heat to it, that all disappears, all right? Conching was really developed to work with bulk or commercial beans, and many of those beans had some defects. They didn't give the best flavor, and you wanted to drive off the extra acetic acid or some other volatile, unpleasant volatiles. And so what became the normal practice is to conch, and in the beginning, they used to do that for like 48 hours, right? Now there's modern equipment that can conch in 8 hours, 7 hours, 4 hours. That's more important today with milk chocolate, because again, we need to develop that caramelized flavor. But with the dark chocolate, we want something subtle, and we want to taste the bean. And so conching is not really that important. As long as we get the fineness and we get the product completely mixed and emulsified, we really don't need to conch it too much, all right? But this hair dryer provides the heat which serves as the conch. So I have a grinder, and my hair dryer providing heat turns it into a conch. I think we're able, and you can see it's liquidy. It looks like chunky peanut butter right now. All right, so I'm gonna put that in there. Now I'm gonna check this, make sure, and that's another thing. When you start grinding, you can leave this open, which basically releases the tension on the rollers, and so they don't press so hard against the stator. All right, but as it starts to grind, we can tighten it down, make it tighter, and then the grinding is more intense. And we've got enough liquid now that we can do that. So I'm going to just add the rest of this. And we're going to let it grind. Now, for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to add the sugar early, okay? All right? Normally I would wait until these nibs are really completely ground, and then I'd add the sugar. And I'd wait until I had something that was fairly liquid, all right? But so you don't have to stand there and watch this thing grind, because it's going to take 3 or 4 hours to grind, all right? And so that would be pretty dull and boring to sit here and watch this thing turn around for 3 or 4 hours. So I'm going to add the basic ingredients. I'm going to add the sugar and the cocoa butter a little bit earlier than I normally would, but that's just for the purposes of this demonstration. So let me get our sugar. Now the sugar, you've got to kind of be careful and keep it against the side. You really can't see, but let me see here. I don't want the sugar to get on the rollers. Well, it's getting on the roller. It's all right on the roller, but I don't want the sugar on this because, again, it doesn't grind. You don't want to just dump it in. You got to kind of dribble it in, but you can add it pretty fast, faster than the nibs. All right, that's the sugar. And now I'm going to add the rest of the cocoa butter. It's a little hot. I'm going to use a rag. And the cocoa butter, I'm just going to dribble in there. All right, so now we have our 3 major ingredients added to the chocolate. The nibs, the sugar, and the cocoa butter. And I'm going to take a spatula, kind of a long, thin spatula. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that along the side, and I'm going to make sure that everything that's on the side gets down into the chocolate. All right, you can see what our consistency is. So it's like chunky peanut butter. And I can take it here, and I can, take it on the rollers and get it off there. But this is not really necessary at this stage. And because we added the cocoa butter early, we're not getting much buildup. So we'll just do that. Right? And so now our basic ingredients are added. So let me just get you a good look at that. And you can see it turning around there. And we're making chocolate. We're grinding. We're grinding and conching at the same time. And that will take us about 4 hours. And 4 hours from now, I'll come back and I will add the minor ingredients. And so goodbye for now. 4 hours later, we'll be back in touch.